I told myself I don't want to get girls pregnant because I don't want to. And I told myself I want to get married at 40 and I'm going to just build my life and, do whatever I need to do. But I don't want to raise kids with people I'm not prepared to be in a marriage with, Because we're leading people astray. Umshado akuyona the wedding day. It's a lifetime thing that requires you noma usuyibekile i-30,000 noma i-50,000 yamalobolo kusadingeka i-250,000 yokondla this family on a month-to-month basis because akwazi ukuyothatha ingane abantu ihlalise emjondolo. You need to aspire for better. You need to aspire to have a 3-bedroom house where you can plan and say le kamera kuzoba elabazali bakho uma bevakashile ile ngane sizoyifaka a small stroller, sifake nombhedo omncane, i-cot la ingane izolala khona, and paint the room in beautiful colors. We have failed to make those plannings, but instead siyobuthela sibuthele siyekamereni senze ingane, and then from there umazibona. Part of us trying to raise or restore men into fathers is actually even speaking to the recipients of the pain, which is the female, because men eventually become trash because of a female has said that. A man becomes a deadbeat father because of that. Why can't we sit down and really talk about everything from finances to availability to what we're pouring into this child? Dumelang sanbonani abshene goeiemôre. It's me again, Lebohang Motsoeneng. I'm back again with Restoring Men into Fathers. And like we said, we are trying to restore men into fathers and bring back families and make sure that they stick together, It's painful to face life alone. It's painful to raise kids alone. It's painful to be fatherless, yet having a father present, So what we're trying to bridge is all those gaps. But like I said earlier on in one of the episodes, we are following a guideline. And our guideline is this book that is authored by Constance Tsakani Sono. And it's titled Restore Men into Fathers. Hence the name of the podcast. Hence the backdrop. Hence the book. So we want to delve deep into that. We're touching on very touchy subjects, but important subjects at that. And we are trying to restore men in a way that is unconventional, We no longer have scenarios where we have abomalume and abomkhulu who are going to call young men and sit them down and, pour into them. Because our society these days has drifted into building together. Everyone wants to build in isolation. And as we build in isolation, Makhelwane cannot tell me how to raise my child. And now I'm limited to telling Makhelwane Uti they shouldn't do this with their kids. And that has brought a sense of arrogance in raising kids. But it has also given kids a system of manipulation, Most fights are caused by misunderstandings. But if we had Abu Baba, Umkhulu, who'd sit young men down. By young men down, I mean boys who are working towards becoming men, Boys who are getting themselves ready to advance from even just being men and becoming fathers. And that's what we want to touch base on. So I'm going to open up with, it's a foreword. I like the foreword that's written in this book. And I'm going to speak in a third person because it's got inverted commas as I speak it. It says, this book is meant to serve as a light unto the journey of a man's identity, direction, or rather directing him to his locus point as a father. The book simplifies the conundrum behind many problems the world is faced with today. I, Tsakani Sono, firmly believe that it will facilitate the restoration of every father to their rightful position and lead every family back to a place of impactful influence. I like this forward. It kind of does sum up the entirety of this book, but it also opens us up to conversations that we have to have as a community, as families, as men, young men, as girls, daughters, we have to find a way to talk about certain things. So today I'm going to try to be frank about certain things I realized in my life. Being raised without a father has its pros and cons, but not so many pros, but just as much cons to it. And the cons are very simple. I mentioned in the last episode, confidence, identity, drive, At some point, I want to speak a little bit about how I was raised by a single mother, whom at times I was hardly with because of circumstances. I'm going to somehow give off my age, but born in the 80s, if I should say that, and during a time whereby the liberation of this country was not yet realized. The 1976 happened, the 80s came through, education and all those things were still, conformed to a standard that was driven by the apartheid system. So I had to be raised outside of my comfort zone, meaning that I was going to be raised away from my mother. So I had to go into mini exile, if I should call it that, but I wasn't a political activist or anything, but you know how we relate to people going into exile. So I spent 6 years in a foreign country that is Eswatini now, as we know it, but it was Swaziland at the time, being raised by a family that which my mother got married into, and being raised by a man who had values and systems in place. He had a vision for his kids. And under those circumstances, it was not easy to relate to anyone. Remember, I'm not being raised in a nucleus family whereby mama and papa are here. I'm not raised by my real father. And at the time, I didn't know who my father is. But I related to him because he was my father. And you'd go up to these family gatherings and people would say, oh, he was a fan of Babake, and that would bring comfort to me. But not that I needed comfort, but it was like, okay, well, sure. I look like my dad, But as growing up and having to face certain dialogues within the family structures where everyone is, trying to express their own emotions towards certain things that are sticking out like a sore thumb, which is me. People would pass on comments like umuntu ongaziwa, awuyena owalana, and obviously at the time I would take it to heart but didn't sit down and really ponder upon it. But it did somehow affect me because it started making me question certain things. It sort of provoked me to start looking at how I'm being treated, how certain things are done. And I would even tell my boys that I never had shoes to play with. I would wear school shoes Monday to Sunday. Even going to church, I'd wear my school shoes. During the week, when I'm done with school, I'd have to get rid of the shoes and walk barefoot. It was fine. I didn't see anything wrong with it, Only that others would wear fancy shoes to church and stuff, and obviously I'm wearing school shoes. And I'd relate this to them in passing just to make them appreciate what they have now, seeing that I am available and present in their lives, and at the time for me, it wasn't that. It wasn't as easy as that, But I started noticing these small things. And I remember telling myself when I grow up, I don't want to have my children go through this, And ideally, God's plan is for us to, especially if you assume the position of a father, you have to be present in your kid's life. Sometimes it would hit me when you hear your parents, or I'd hear my mother tell me, sex before marriage is a sin. And you want to go to the Bible and look at that. Where is it written? Angiboni. Give me the verse. I want the verse, And like an idiom, it's something that will be said within the church circles or Christian circles. And we didn't understand it at the time. We thought, bafuna usincisha ubumnandi. Esingabazi nakhona, but it's that kind of a thing. But until you start playing in the wrong circles, you realize that, ngibacile, I shouldn't have done this because of 1, 2, 3, 4. In our days today, we are raising kids who have fathers elsewhere, or somebody's raising our kids in our absence, because of dynamics. And speaking of dynamics, I know that when my mother was pregnant with me, my biological father didn't even know that she was pregnant. At some point I was angry at both my father and mother. That's after the passing of the father, the man who raised me, whom I called Papa, After he passed on, a lot of things happened that brought to light the fact that I wasn't from that family. Instead, I was a stepchild, Having to come back from Eswatini to come stay with my mother this side. I remember 12 years old, she did relate to me that, no, indeed, that family was correct, It's just that they didn't do it the correct way to tell you that umuntu ongaziwa. But now that you are here, your father is alive. He exists. He's not the one you just recently buried, but he has his own family and stuff. And the quest to now look for him was there. And you can imagine how difficult it is. Sometimes you watch shows like Khumbule Ekhaya and you look at how painful it is for people to try find their fathers and stuff, find their families, their mothers and so forth. After years and years, some even don't even find them. So I was lucky to find him. And remembering that as a child, I didn't want to end up in the position ebekuyona yena. But that's because some of the details were not clear to me. So you can kind of tell, me being a father now, how difficult it is to relate to my sons on how they should become what I was never taught. Remember, I'm still under the topic, the day I noticed I was becoming my father. And I remember my firstborn son, whom I got before I got married, who is about 15 years old now, turning 16 in the next year. When he was conceived, I was not married to his mother. And I vowed to myself that what my father did to me, I will not do to him. But little beknownst to me was that I was about to start the same pattern again. But I'm starting this pattern unaware. And my awareness comes in small trickles, bit by bit, And I made that vow and I wanted to stick by it. But the conditions were not as favorable as I desired. Just out of tertiary, in and out of work, meaning that I have an unstable income, and you can't control or put control measures. People are free to do whatever they want to do. And I sat back and I, searching for my identity, went to my father's place. Well, not his place, but where he was raised. Spoke to my aunts. They welcomed me. And that was way before I had a child. But remember, in my teens, I was trying to find this man because I'm looking for my identity, I'm looking for someone I can relate to, someone I can say, yeah, lo, baba milona, and I can see myself in him because apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I kind of wanted to pin down some of my behaviors, I wanted him to sit down and point to me and tell me, you being raised in this, you being born into this family, this is how we do things, da-da-da-da-da. But that never happened. He was very protective of his family because he was also married. And how I was conceived was much of a painful story because it was December, I know that I think they met in November or something. My mother was accompanying my uncle, my aunt actually, umamncane, who was epileptic, and she accompanied her to Eparagwana. That's where she met my dad, who was a paramedic. And obviously, kushelaniwe and whatever the case is, and then fine, kwaba umjolo and so forth. And then when my mother realized that she had conceived me, she made her way to where my father stays. And she found him young as he was, early 20s, He was having a party and he was having girls around. And my mother saw the girls there and turned away and never even had that conversation with him to say, hey, dude, I'm pregnant now. So she walked away and never told him. Fast forward 18 years later, he hears the news that he's got a son. And voila, it's me. It was tough for him to actually have to stomach that, It was difficult for him to stomach that. And I would understand. If I was a Rolling Stone and a rock star, having to wake up one day and there's umntwana who comes up and says, ubabami, obviously it would be difficult knowing that there were channels that could have been followed to introduce me or to mention that, hey, sekuso, senkulelwe, or whatever the case is. But that didn't happen and it became difficult. But I was angry with him. A few years later, I started becoming him and not aware that I was becoming him. And ukhule other kids have got fathers, and you see their confident levels are high and they're okay, But I didn't entertain that whole thing of babami washona or babamugup. I didn't, because I'd grown a mechanism that would help me block off that because it brought pain to me. So I created a wall that would keep the emotions, Because the more I thought about it, the more I pursued him. I remember there are times I'd call him, come back from school, excuse me, and I would call him and say, hey, Yimi, Ulebu. He'd be like, you know what, look, man, please speak to your mom. So yeah, it was really, that's why I faced rejection. That's me after seeing him for the first time, which I couldn't even look him in the eye because when I first met my dad, he was visiting a friend. And that friend was a mutual friend of my mom and my dad. And I remember the lady called my mom when we were visiting my mom's older sister. He's like, hey, ubaba ka Lebohang la. My mom was like, yeah, start the motor. Let's quickly get there. You're going to meet your dad. And I was like, why like this? Why an ambush? And we ambushed the man, unfortunately. And that was my first case of rejection. Second case of rejection came when I started calling him. And as I called him, he told me, no, go speak to your mom. Speak to your mom. I'm unable to talk to you. We need to have a formal setting to actually talk about this. And I didn't know Guti, he didn't want to speak about this, not because of Mtwana, but because it's news to him. He has to go back and check his file, if I should call it a file. Just, okay, we dated with this person. Yes, we did do shenanigans, but she didn't tell me she was pregnant. And then voila, now there's a 16-year-old. How do I deal with this? Now I'm married, I've got kids. How do I relate this to my wife? So it became so complex. And I won't lie, I started to hate him, though the edge of knowing him was growing more and more because I'm now becoming a young adult, and being mischievous and doing things, I told myself I don't want to get girls pregnant because I don't want to. And I told myself I want to get married at 40 and I'm going to just build my life and, do whatever I need to do. But I don't want to raise kids with people I'm not prepared to be in a marriage with, And school came, went to school, finished school, met a girl, got her pregnant, wanted to marry her. Things didn't work out. Now I've had to face that conundrum of saying, okay, now I'm going to raise umntwana separately. And firstborn, and it's a boy. Now we're going back to where I was or where I am, where I'm a father and unomam, and you can't insist on trying to raise umntwana umfana nomawakhe unless if the mother is a drunkard, a druggie, or someone who's unstable mentally, then you'd want to assume that position. Now I have to work on a co-parenting style, which I'm young and I don't know this. I want to raise my son in a proper setting, but that didn't happen. So I realized now I'm becoming my father. And I know a lot of people can relate to this, and we read on the social media platforms where people are complaining about deadbeat dads and stuff. And I look at that thing and I think, you know what? Sometimes it's easy to have women call men deadbeat dads, and no one has real conversations about how did we get to that position where Ubaba is not actively involved in upbringing or in the upbringing of umntwana. Yes, it's easy to demand imali to raise umntwana. Yes, it's easy to take things to the courts and stuff, but are we having a real conversation? Are we having a proper dialogue? Or are we bringing anger to the table? Are we bringing our issues? Are we bringing the fact that we are right, he's wrong, or I'm right, they're wrong to the table? And at the end of the day, nobody wins, There's a saying that when a family feuds, nobody wins, And in most cases that happens. We have differences. Now, it's a matter of Guti, I have to prove, I'm going to stand my ground. Now, on their end, they're saying, yes, this was Umoshile and did 1, 2, 3, 4, and then now he wants to get away with it. Excuse me. So, Kuba, now all those things that are happening, and slowly but surely we are becoming the very thing that we don't want to become, And at this point in time, I'm not defending Amadota, nor am I saying what women are doing is correct, And we are at that point as humans. We are at that point as a black nation, a brown nation. We are there where we are raising kids, or somebody's raising our kids in our absence because we didn't want to sit down and really iron out things the best way possible, where we can say this is the proper way of doing it. So I saw that pattern that which my father had done to me, though his circumstances were different from mine, because he never knew that I existed. If you hlangane nomuntu November, December, isikhathi sokugroover, and people do stuff, and whether they do it under the influence or not under the influence, if you meet somebody and then they stop calling you January, you assume that it's over and everybody goes on with their lives. So I'm trying to match apples with apples, but I realize that no, these are all fruits. There's apples and oranges. But here I am now, raising a son whom I'm present in his life, but not to the full measure because of circumstances, And becoming my father is not what I desired, because he never poured into me in a way that which I could stand up and say, I'm proud of the father that he was. Yes, now he's late. He was buried last year. That is 2024. He was buried, and we never had a proper relationship where I could relate to him. So now I'm starting to be like him, and the unfortunate part is that he never raised me. We never had a relationship, Everything I've known about him, I've heard from my aunts, but I never knew from him. He did have a meeting with me and my mom to apologize. And he told me, no, I'm sorry that I wasn't there in your upbringing. Your mom and myself didn't do the right thing. My parents passed away, and they never knew ukuthi you were present. And all I wanted to do was to foster an incubation system where we can have a dialogue, where your mother can relate to me all the things that happened, He has sons, he has a daughter whom he's poured into. They use his surname, and here I am, Mina. I'm not using his surname, and he doesn't know whether I went to school in Aqeda or what the case is. So he did show a sense of remorse, And I did tell him that, look, I'm not looking for money. I'm not looking for a handout. All I wanted was an acknowledgement from your end. And he acknowledged at that time. And that was okay. And prior to that, we had back and forth, because as I was trying to get to know him, I would call him. I'd be the one calling him. And the only time he did call me was when he was asking for money. He'd call me. I remember I was working at the time, and he'd call me, hey, Lebza, how are you? I'm like, I'm fine. He's like, hey, man, can you boost me with about $300, man? I need to pour gas. And I hated that. I hated that with all my life, that, you know what, you can't even call me to ask me how am I, if I've eaten, if all is well, what am I doing? But all you do is call me to ask me for imali. And we had a back and forth to a point whereby I said, you know what, if you're not going to call me and ask me, Uti, impilo njani, let's stop this thing. Let's not call each other. And he was like, okay, fine. It was that. It was like, Then we stopped at that. And then years later, that's when he called. He asked for a meeting between myself and my mom. And, at the time, I had now been married. And I had my second-born son. And we had that dialogue. It was okay. But after that, we didn't have a conversation. We never called each other, except for I'd get a call from my older brother, who's now passed on as well. He would tell me, hey, time I'm there too, and we are thinking to go check him as Belly. And I was like, oh, cool, let's do that. And mind you, he's the only sibling I had just met, and I had not met through him, but I'd met through my aunts. And there were 3 more siblings that I'd not met, whom I would have wished to have met, and I didn't meet them at the time. Only got to meet them when he was pronounced dead. And I don't know what the issues were, but at that part, yes, he did fail to bring us together. And I hated that, because now, even at this present time, we don't have a relationship, because remember, abangazi bahlangane nami ngomncwabo, and here is this new person whom we've not known, and now he's claiming certain things. Maybe in their minds they're thinking, this guy ufuna imali zikababa wethu, or anything like that. But speaking to restoring men into fathers, that's a path that we have to sit down and speak about, especially as brown people. We need to speak about this more intensely because we are going through the same circle. Even today, there's a young man who's just impregnated a young lady, perhaps with the intention of not raising the kids. Perhaps he wants to raise the kids, but there's going to be issues that come up that are going to drift him away from being a present father. And I honestly want to have this dialogue, not only with Amajita, but I want to have this dialogue with females as well, because part of us trying to raise or restore men into fathers is actually even speaking to the recipients of the pain, which is the female, because men eventually become trash because of a female has said that. A man becomes a deadbeat father because of that. Why can't we sit down and really talk about everything from finances to availability to what we're pouring into this child? I mean, honestly, if Begangami, I would honestly go with what our parents have been telling us. Don't engage in sexual activities until you're married, because from there on, you can raise a proper family. But when being raised by ubaba who's elsewhere and you're not married, it's difficult. It's painful because you're going to have to subject yourself to certain things that you are not prepared for. And with the scarcity of imsebenzi, it becomes impossible to try and meet the demands as a kwan and raising a child in this day and time, And honestly, these are conversations we're supposed to have. So one day I'd honestly like to have guests who are going to sit down with me and we have a heart-to-heart talk whereby we're not debating, but we're having a fruitful conversation where we are trying to come up with solutions, try to equip young people. Abstinence is still key. I won't lie. Abstinence is still key. It's still key. It avoids a lot of things. And I know nowadays it doesn't matter. It's uncool to be a virgin. It's uncool to not having sex for the longest time. It's uncool not to date. But all these things perpetuate to an eventuality whereby you are bound to have sex. And it may be sex in a setting where you use protection, but eventually you're going to lose all those guards and eventually you are going to have a baby. But are you going to follow the channels, the proper channels, or what? Those are some of the things we need to talk about. To a degree, I as an outie or as a gent, I need to say, no, man, I can't do this. I won't be doing this because umphumela wakhona kuzoba ingane. Am I ready to raise a child or not? Or at the heat of the moment, we do things and then ingane bakhona, and then I run off. Do fathers really run away? What happens, kahle kahle? That's another thing we need to talk about, because if I'm going to avoid becoming my father, or becoming my father who was not present, or becoming my father who abused me, or becoming my father who was never available, we need to have a discussion around raising umntwana and stuff. Do we want to get there? So I want to work together with people who want to restore men into fathers. And I'm calling out Amajita, Bobaba, men who are older than me, men who have been through this, men who are conquering, men who are still trying to find a way, because this podcast is not really about controversy, but it's more about bringing solutions to the table, through the issues that we face, through the topics and the conversations we have, through our own experiences. I've shared a little bit about my experience, but it goes deeper than that, But I don't want to make this about myself, but I want to have a dialogue around that so we can find solutions and really restore men into fathers, especially men who either don't have a voice or men who do have a voice but have the option of not doing certain things, I'm going to call a spade a spade, I even myself had to come to a realization that it's not okay to just say, no, I'll pick up a call and call you alone. Yes, umntana must eat. Yes, umntana must go to school. But you also want to have that dialogue with umama wengane to say, Vetu, I can't afford to do this. I will try my bit, langzo kona kona. Let's discuss school. Do you want to send umntana to an expensive school? Currently, I can't afford that. But when I'm okay, I will make sure that I do that. Those are things we need to talk about. But those conversations hardly happen, and they build up animosity and they build grudges and stuff, Eventually it pours to umntwana. Umntwana starts hating ubaba, starts hating umama, starts hating both parents because they feel like they need to live a certain lifestyle and they are not afforded that. So I want us to have that dialogue. I'm fighting my best. I'm fighting with all that I have, rather, to avoid becoming my father. Got 3 boys. 2 I have within my marriage, the one ngimthole before ngishada. And I'm having to raise them, not having a blueprint of how being a father is like. Sometimes I look at them and I cry, and I'm not crying because I'm in pain, but I'm crying because I get to see something that my father never got to see. And I look at them, they get to see a life I never had. I get to have conversations with them that I never had with my father. And for what God has given me, I'm going to protect that with all that I can, because I'm proud of who I have become, and I'm proud of not becoming my father. He has his flaws, yes, but I also understand his circumstances that led to him not raising me as a son, And I commend him for acknowledging me. And some people might not have that privilege of having umuntu who doesn't even know what they're about to die, have to sit down and, mend certain, things. But let's have this dialogue. Let's have this conversation. Let's have grounds for peace where we can have this conversation as humans, I understand you've moved on. I understand you don't like me or you don't love me like you did when we were still jollering, But how can we move past the fact that we no longer have feelings for each other? I've moved on, you've moved on. But there is a human being now who looks up to both of us, that we can't fail because we have issues where I've had years of not supporting because of circumstances. You've had years of anguish and pain where you have to upatanisa izinto so that things can be okay. How do we have that dialogue whereby this young boy or this young girl doesn't become their father eventually as they grow up? So as part of the remedy, we have to fight to restore men into fathers. I am becoming a father. I have not become one, but I'm becoming a father. And not having male mentors around me, it has been a difficult journey, but I don't want the next generation to have that. Sinayi mkhakha within our church, sinayi mkhakha within social medias where other fathers are trying to do this. Let's not stop, Bobaba. Let us do this. Let us grow communities where we can foster the growth of a young man, where we can foster dialogues that can help young men become fathers, where we can have young girls look up to fathers and say, Ubaba magangkhulisanga, but I have Ubaba Motsoeneng whom I can speak to with issues relating to me as a daughter who doesn't have a father. Of course, I can't cross the line. I can't talk about certain things that would need my wife to step in and speak to a young girl to, where we move away from Abu Baba, become predators, where a young girl speaks to you about her vulnerabilities and then you take advantage of them because they don't have a father. They have umalume, but they're afraid of umalume because he's constantly drunk, or umalume is not there. Umalume has his own issues, Let's have those dialogues because we have such people in our circles. We have young men who don't have fathers. For whatever reasons, they don't have fathers. They can't even say, you know what, I'm going to a magic dance. Anginaisudu, anginaziqathulo, anginalutho. Can you help me? Anginakho ukudla. I don't know how to draft a CV. I want to go look for a job. Or I'm trying to figure out ukuthi ngiyakusiphi isikole mangiqeda. They don't have that. They don't have anyone to bounce ideas to, you know. Some of them have fallen into the same trap engangena kuyona nami of having umntwana out of wedlock. They don't know how to deal with certain things. I never had people to sit down with me and say, noma kunje mfana, yenza kanje. You have to do this. I've never had men who are hard on me and say, Lebo, you can't just relax. Find a way, ntwana. Look for means. Hambi umema robotini, dayisa amaswiti, thenga amakhekhe mfethu wondla ingane yakho. I didn't have men who were hard on me for my own benefit. But I'm ready to become that man, not only to my kids, but to kids within my circle. Ntwana, you can't be this. We can't have this dialogue. No. Ungangitshela ukuthi ufuna ukushada manje usubeke emalini uyoyondla ngani ingane yabantu uyohlala phi naye asiqale lapho thola umsebenzi sebenza lungisa imali amalobolo but lento ingabi umsebenzi okungabi into enzima ezogcina ukwenza ukuthi uyilobolile ingane yabantu kodwa usakhona ukuyondla. Let's build stability first before you assume the position yokushada. You know, now intombi yami lo mfana othi ufuna ukukushada uphuma kumuphi umndeni kunjani la iqhamuka khona? Is he coming from a stable family? Uzokwazi ukukondla na noma wena ushawa ama-butterflies uyachaza lo mfana unamashiya amahle, he's got beautiful eyes, he's tall, dark and handsome. Usajabuliswe ilokho na ujabuliswe ukuthi uhamba ngevrupaw uhamba nge-BM usachazwe lokho na can he be able to step up endaweni kababa wakho and take care of you? Can we have those dialogues? Because we're leading people astray. Umshado akuyona the wedding day. It's a lifetime thing that requires you noma usuyibekile i-30,000 noma i-50,000 yamalobolo kusadingeka i-250,000 yokondla this family on a month-to-month basis because akwazi ukuyothatha ingane abantu ehlalise emjondolo. You need to aspire for better. You need to aspire to have a 3-bedroom house where you can plan and say le kamera kuzoba elabazali bakho mabevakashile le ngane sizoyifaka small stroller sifake nombhedo omncane i-cot la ingane izolala khona and paint the room in beautiful colors. We have failed to make those plannings, but instead sibuthele sikamereni senze ingane and then from there umazibona. It is painful. Women have become stronger in certain areas where us men have not stepped up to. And these are dialogues I want us to have as we restore men into fathers. We have to fight to build that system where we can have hard topics in building a society. Mina, I won't lie to you. If you come to me as a young man, you're saying funa ukushada, I will ask you namalini. Ungangitshela ukuthi unemali yelobola. Mali yelobola is like change. Ungangitshela ukuthi unemali yokushada. You can spend 100K, you can spend $1 million, but if you don't have another 3-4 million to maintain your family for the next 3 years, then what are we talking about? And I'm not trying to pressure Majita to doing things like ngamelanga bazenze, but let us sit down and do calculations. What does it take to raise a family? Because now you're moving into a space where you are going to father not only your son or your daughter, but you're going to father even your wife, whom you've been handed to by obabwake or malumwake. You have to be that for them. So we have to look into that. So on our next episode, I'm going to be touching on another subject matter, but also extending this topic because I'm fighting every day not to become my father. I want to become myself, but applying principles esengifundile from biblical perspective, from my mentors, you know, and looking at life the way ngakhona impilo. So those are things I'm trying to look into. So I'm saying, let us meet again. Subscribe, like, share, and just follow us on our YouTube, Restore Men into Fathers. and usibhalele if you need to. I want to have conversations. I want to build structures. I want to help young men. I want to help people who are in a nuclear family. You've just started a new family. Let's talk. Let's have a dialogue, because we have to restore you to becoming the best that you can. I keep pointing out to this logo. This is a woman, and these are kids, and this is a man who has fallen, but they can't do it alone. Let's find a way. Naso lesihlahla naso kufuna sihluze kumqondo, sibe ready to come up and become prayerful, because indoda must pray in order for him to come back to where he needs to be. Nkulunkulu wabeka mina entsimini, wathi tend this, look after this, multiply and have dominion. But angikwazi ukudominate angigqwalisa ingane everywhere and I'm not taking care of them. Angikwazi ukudominate if I'm not in position. So let us come back again and do what we need to do. Restore men into fathers. Danko, I'm signing out.